Good morning, everyone. We're ready to start. A lot of good conversations. We're ready to start, but as usual, there's a lot of good conversations going on right now, but we'll have to interrupt you on that. You can resume it later and get on with our program. Before we start our meeting today, as you know, this is the first meeting of the new year, and people are commenting we're already into the second week, and it's just hard to visualize how quickly time is moving on. And so I'd like to call upon Fred Callahan to lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, announcements. People here someone that hasn't been here for a while, I'd like to introduce themselves. Any of our elected officials. We know we have a lot of water elected officials. Okay, very
good. Roman Reina, City Councilman Santa Ana, also on the Water Board for Orange County Water District, and I just got assigned this last board meeting, so it's my first time here.
Oh, welcome. I'm certain we'll see you more frequently now.
And you will, and you will.
Okay, our special reports today, I'm going to, are you still? I'm good. You good? I'm good. Okay, what we want to do is spend a few minutes just to get an update from the Orange County Water District and MoDOC on the water supply situation. And a friend of WACO, Greg Woodside.
Thank you.
Please update us.
Thank you. So with the rains we had this week, we got some very nice runoff. So Prado Dam is what I'm going to show here. So Prado Dam has a tributary area, roughly 2,000 square miles. So we did get a good amount of runoff. So this is a copy of the Corps' website. The Corps has a really good website. You can log in and see what the status is of Prado, and it's real-time data. They update it at least every hour. So I'll just walk through this real quickly. So this is for the last day. So as of this morning, if you look at the dash line, the storage line, that's this line. So the storage line, you read that on the right side, the right axis. So that's the storage in acre feet. So this is the storage in acre feet on this side. So it's saying this, in round numbers, 12,000 acre feet of water in storage at Prado. 12,000 acre feet of water. We're just tickled pink. We love it. So just to walk you through the rest of the graph here, the green line is the water level elevation. You read that on the left side. So that's about 500 feet water surface elevation. That's this line right here, the green line. So the core will store for us right now up to 503.9. So the good thing is we haven't lost any water from Prado to the ocean. So the Corps has kept water in Prado and released it at rates we can take. So I walk you through two more lines. The kind of pinkish line is the average inflow. So that's this line right here. Average inflow, that's the total water coming into the basin in cubic feet per second. So you see that line, if you went back yesterday, 24 hours ago, it was up around 5,500 cubic feet per second. So that was from the storm on Wednesday. So this was the inflow that primarily resulted from the flow from the storm on Wednesday. And the other line, the blue line, is the outflow. So that's how much they're releasing. So this right here is the outflow from Prado. We're doing about 200 CFS. So yesterday, we asked them to increase it to about 450 CFS yesterday afternoon. So they increased the rate. And that's how much we can capture from Prado, about 450 CFS. That concludes my presentation, if there's any questions.
Any questions on?
How was there any time during Wednesday we saw abnormally high rainfall? I've experienced this instantaneously in my neighborhood going downhill. Literally all of the clear storm drains were overflowing, meaning the water was coming out fast so that it could go out.
It was just my general observation. It was a pretty good rainstorm on Wednesday. I haven't seen any statistics on it, but yeah. Another question.
How is the percolation basin in the Anaheim doing?
We're constructing one right now, so there's one under construction. The other basins are doing really well, so we have them ready coming out of the fall. We'd gotten them ready in the fall so we could capture as much water as we can. So things are working well up there.
So we're capturing this right now?
Yes. Yeah, on Wednesday, Thursday, there was a short period of time where there was inflow below Prado that we lost. So there's a large area between Prado and Imperial Highway. It's about 35,000 acres of tributary area below Prado, but above our Imperial inflatable dam near Imperial Highway. So we got about 1,000 CFS of peak inflow from that area below Prado. So we couldn't capture quite all that water. So we capture all the water from Prado, but there's an area where below Prado it comes in real fast. We can capture some of that, but not all that. And it did rain hard enough on Wednesday that we couldn't quite capture all that.
Okay. Very good. Well, it's nice hearing something about we couldn't capture all of it, so conditions are looking better. And I know we're going to hear from you very frequently as time goes on as we monitor the situation. Thanks,
Okay.
Greg.
Sure. I'm going to pull up something else. Go ahead.
When you bring good news, you bring back the end.
That's
This is self-explanatory from ODOT, looking at the snowfall and rainfall in the Sacramento Valley between this time, 2015, 2016, so you can see how things are looking a lot better. In terms of snowpack, we're pretty close to normal, just a little bit above normal. So it's better than the 21% we had last year. So anyway, just a snapshot. Okay, very good. We'll hear more about this subject as it evolves.
Switch to that other presentation. You can go ahead. Okay.
Okay, next is our report from Aqua and Kathy Green, our president of the Water District.
Good morning. I'll go over a few highlights that we'll be looking at this year. Our near-term activities that we'll be looking at is the state board. That's Tim Quinn's biggest priority. The drought emergency conservation regulations, as proposed, would unwind decades of progress and local resources developed in California. So Aqua's goal is working with numerous member agencies to get full credit. And many people in Orange County are involved in this, including Orange County Water District, for all of our local resource investments and an off-ramp so that regulations end if a wet spring ends the drought emergency. Also, we're looking at doing a Water 201, and on January 14th, Aqua and the Brown administration are co-hosting a major event in Sacramento to highlight the progress in implementing the California Water Action Plan, which was adopted in 2014. This is significant because it strengthens the resolve of the administration to move forward with a comprehensive statewide water policy. We're also looking at water market initiatives. In July, the Aqua Board approved a water transfer policy advocating that the Brown administration work with Aqua and others to find ways to make California's fledgling water market. A technical advisory group is working on recommendations to considerably improve the functioning of the California water market. Paul Weichhorst from Irvine Ranch Water District. I don't see Paul right here. He's leading that. The goal is to take bold recommendations to the Aqua Board on January 29th. This is expected to be an area of high priority for us. Storage, in 2015, the Aqua Board approved a storage policy. Based on that policy, we have formed a water storage integration work group. The group is examining powerful ideas of integrating new storage investments with each other as opposed to potentially opposing each other. With existing infrastructure and especially with California's groundwater basins. In essence, the proponents of all of Chapter 8, Proposition 1 proposed projects are checking their guns, rolling up their sleeves, and working together to make an integrated, understandable, and powerful policy. A report is scheduled for July. Headwaters, Steve Lamar from Irvine Ranch Water District in the back there, is the new chair of the Aqua Federal Affairs Committee and an Aqua member, and has been leading the efforts with Aqua to improve the management of the California forests. We have been active in Washington, D.C. on legislation to better manage federal forests and creating a political coalition called the California Forest and Watershed Alliance. If you need any more information on that, check in with Steve and he'll bring you up to date. And then local agency rate making, Larry McKinney is heading this, and Aqua is working with the League of Cities and the California State Association of Counties on the proposed constitutional amendments to provide greater choice and flexibility to local agencies establishing water rates. This is addressing 218. But we're only addressing Chapter 10. And the big thing with this, the proposal adds a new provision to the California Constitution that would better allow local agencies at their sole discretion to first finance stormwater and flood control infrastructure, implement tiered conservation pricing if they desire to do so, and adopt lifeline rates for lower income families. And again, check with Larry McKinney with all of your opinions. They're working on this as we speak. And so as you can see, we'll have a very busy year. We will ask Tim Quinn in the future to come down and talk to all of us. You can ask lots of information, but I'll be giving you monthly reports. Thanks.
Linda, you ready? Linda Ackerman, GMWD report.
Good morning and Happy New Year to all of you. This report is going to be short. Metropolitan did not meet between the last time WACO met and today, so I can only talk about the future. Well, I've already talked about the past. As I indicated at the December meeting, Met's draft IRP was presented to the public. It was put out. This document is phase one of the IRP, and in it is incorporated updated regional data regarding supplies and demands, risks, and challenges. Phase two of the IRP, as I indicated also last month, will address the associated policy issues that the board will discuss at length. The next big item that will come before the Met board is the budget. There will be several workshops at Metropolitan as we tackle this task. These workshops will begin in February, and they will culminate with the board approval of a 2-year budget at the April board meeting. So stay tuned for updates from me as we move along with that budget process. In Met's ongoing strategy to provide a reliable source of water for the region, which will help augment our Colorado River supplies, the board will discuss an information item next week. And this item will involve an agreement with BARD Water District, which is the land management group of farmers. It's a public agency, who will agree to fallow land on a seasonal basis for Metropolitan. This land that they agree to fallow has to have been actively farmed for 5 months from April to August in the years 2014 and 2015. Metropolitan proposes and expects to pay $400 per acre foot of water. Of land fallowed per year. This will be a 2-year pilot program, and the hope is that it will be a mutually agreeable program that will continue at the end of the pilot term. Met's fallowing programs was Palo Verde Irrigation District, for instance, started out also as a 2-year project, and it has continued agreeably between the two parties. That's it from Met. Now I will try to, after I blow my nose, I have one of those wonderful sinus infections. Now I will try to, I try to keep track of my obscure facts, but it's hard. I didn't keep very good records. So, and hopefully some of you have a memory like mine, which isn't very good. So I did find, and I found this to be interesting, and I read it, and I thought about presenting it once, and I wasn't sure if I did it. Do any of you know where the world's oldest and deepest freshwater lake is? Is Pierre here? Yes. Don't answer if you know. Anybody else know? Antarctica. Who said Russia? Russia, good. Is that our tune? Good morning. Lake Baikal is the world's oldest and deepest freshwater lake. It curves for nearly 400 miles through southeastern Siberia, north of the Mongolian border. In case you're interested, it is surrounded by mile-high snow-capped mountains, offers unmatched vistas of beauty. The mountains are a haven for wild animals. There are small villages if you decide to look for this tranquility. And it is in the Siberian forest. This lies, it's interesting, it's in a cleft where Asia is literally splitting apart from its partner land, and it is forming and will form an ocean eventually. We won't see that. It's more than 5,000 feet deep. It has oxygen-rich waters, by the way, with lots of bizarre life forms. One of those is the seal's favorite food, which is a pink, partly transparent fish, which gives birth to live young. Geologists estimate that Lake Baikal formed somewhere between 20 to 25 million years ago, during the Mesozoic Age. And that is the report from Metropolitan. Thank you.
Okay, our next presenter will be Eric Sepperstein, who's the federal lobbyist for the Orange County Water District. We can find out all the good activities in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Don. And hello, everybody. And I've been told that I should keep my remarks brief, which is always a challenge. So let's just go to questions and answers.
No.
All right. So everybody knows that the drought bill, first of all, let me say that I was glad to be here now because I can go back to Washington and say that it really does rain occasionally in California. It's a fiction otherwise. In all seriousness, let me sort of quickly go through two sort of parts of this presentation. First, where we ended in December when Congress recessed or adjourned, and what we're looking forward to in the next couple of months, with a focus on what kind of dollars are out there to support water infrastructure and water resources in general. So everybody knows that we didn't get a drought bill last session. It collapsed towards the end of middle of December. And the reasons for the collapse are not going to be new to you. It really was a function of disputes and conflicts over environmental streamlining of the rules and regulations, changes to environmental water, and how you do water transfers to the Central Valley. Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer worked with the House leadership, particularly and specifically Representative Kevin McCarthy, Representative Calvert, and others, to figure out a way to get to that point where they had a happy agreement on those key issues. That was, as has been the practice, very difficult, and that's really what happened when you get to the base what went wrong. It was an inability to come to agreement on those issues. There is a sort of silver lining, though. In the course of trying to get to an agreement in December, the House members agreed to put in language to support water infrastructure that was important to Senator Feinstein. So for the first time in this debate of the past couple of years, we saw a House proposal that provided $200 million for water recycling and $100 million to support desalination project activities. So if you were trying to find a sort of optimistic note in this whole debate at the end of the year, it was sort of a recognition that any drought relief bill might and will be including water infrastructure assistance. We'll see what happens this coming year, but that's where we are there. Now, on the budget front, a little more optimistic news. They reached an agreement back in November on a 2-year budget cycle ceiling. So there's an overall agreement on what the total dollars the federal government would spend for the next 2 years, the current budget year and the 2017 budget year that begins this coming September. What we saw was additional resources committed to both the military side and the domestic side of spending, which is important for our issues because there's adequate resources to continue funding of water resource needs, both in the Department of the Interior, Agriculture, and EPA's State Revolving Loan Fund program. Specifically, looking forward, what we saw was Senator Feinstein providing getting $100 million for emergency drought relief efforts for project activities funded through the Bureau of Reclamation that will provide immediate and short-term drought relief. So this next year, starting yesterday, so to speak, the Bureau of Reclamation has $100 million above and beyond what the President requested to support competitive solicitations for water infrastructure project activities. And what does that mean? It can be feasibility studies, it might be water metering, it might be conservation in general, it can be infrastructure, water, energy, water nexus activities to decrease the cost of treating water or moving water. Those are kind of things that will be out there, we believe, in the next couple of months before September when the budget year ends, that the Bureau of Reclamation will be supporting and seeking funding or seeking projects for. Now, don't rush out and start sort of sharpening your pencils and what have you. It's going to be a couple of months before the Bureau, gets the requests out on the street. But it's going to happen. It's $100 million. And by comparison, Senator Feinstein in the past budget year was able to receive or secure $50 million. So what we have is a doubling of the resources outside of Title 16 and other water smart programs of the Bureau of Reclamation. The other encouraging news is that a number of you folks, including the Orange County Water District, were back in Washington pushing very hard for increased funding for the State Revolving Loan Fund program. Now, you may think, well, we don't need loans, we need grant assistance or other innovative funding assistance. But the importance is that the Congress agreed to boost the budget for the Clean Water SRF program to $1.35 billion. So the reason that's important is when you reach that threshold, the state has the authority now to give subsidized assistance beyond low-interest loans, for example, negative interest loans, or ability to forgive the principal of a loan. Those are two important matters that now are available if the state board decides to allow that to happen. The second thing that's important is that the Clean Water SRF program, courtesy of Senator Boxer and others during the Water Resources Development Act rewrite a year or two ago, provided language that said if you hit this threshold limit of beyond $1 billion, you are able, EPA and the states, to fund through the Clean Water SRF program water recycling facilities, water conservation activities, and green infrastructure in general. And green infrastructure is oftentimes just a code word for stormwater controls. You're able to fund those projects with SRF money that traditionally would go toward traditional wastewater type control technology infrastructure. So that's really encouraging because you do have the opportunity of another bucket of money, if you will, to secure for water resources work. One of the things that did not happen and will probably come back in this coming cycle is the policy rider issue. Congress attempted to eliminate, roll back the Waters of the United States rulemaking that for the most part does not necessarily really affect any of you in here, the way the EPA issued the rule to carve out wastewater treatment facilities and sort of water recycling facilities from regulation changes under the Waters of the United States rule. There are some tweaks in that need to be taken care of. But they weren't able in Congress to put a rider together because the president issued a veto threat if that provision were put on the budget. So I think we're going to see that come back again. And, again, I think at the end of the day, because this rulemaking is going to go to the Supreme Court at some point for decision, that it's basically a lot of noise, and excuse the cynicism, but it's a little bit of a campaign initiative at this point because, as I say, it's going to be decided by the courts. But we'll see that come back. As far as other issues in the budget go, one of the interesting things that came out is a continual push forward for public-private partnerships for the agencies to look at ways to spur water infrastructure assistance through public-private partnerships, through innovative funding approaches. And I think that's important because you have the administration saying that too, and I think that may be the direction in many cases of where we're going in this country for future funding of water infrastructure needs, let alone other infrastructure needs. And we saw that and continue to see it most recently 2 weeks ago when the Department of the Interior announced an environmental financing center being created to figure out ways to promote more private money into the development of water resources needs across the country and across the West. One other item in the interest of time, and then if there is time, Don, I'll be happy to take any questions. Water Resources Development Act. We were unlikely to see a Water Resources Development Act being put together in the next year or so's time until Congress miraculously came to agreement with the administration and passed a 5-year reauthorization of the transportation bill. So the good news is we got the transportation bill with adequate funding for the nation's road needs, and now the committees with jurisdiction over the Water Resources Development Act bill, which also had jurisdiction over the transportation bill, really don't have much to do. So now WRDA becomes a priority. In February, the House is expected to receive, and the Senate, the Corps of Engineers report on, quote, projects that the administration believes should be considered for authorization and funding. That list, which is required through the recent rewrite of WRDA in 2014, that list will be sort of the starting gun, if you will, for a congressional review of how the Corps is implementing WRDA. An important point because the Corps received a total of almost $2 billion above the President's request for this budget year to support construction projects, to do feasibility studies within their authorities to do flood protection issues, ecosystem restoration issues, and what have you. So we expect that in February, those mandates for the Corps to do more with their resources will be reviewed by the committees of the Senate and the House, and that will form the basis to put together a rewrite of WRDA later this year. Whether the bill becomes law or not remains to be seen. There isn't a lot of time this year to do a lot of legislation, but there is a desire to get this bill put in place so that if they can't get it done this year, when the Congress reconvenes in January of next year, that they'll be in a place to move quickly on a Water Resources Development Act bill. That's important because if we get back into this cycle, there'll be more monies flowing to do flood protection. There'll be more monies flowing to do ecosystem environmental restoration in connection with flood protection. And there'll be more abilities to do feasibility studies or to get these projects moving forward that have been sort of waiting for attention from the Corps, but the Corps has always sort of said, we don't have enough resources, we have a backlog. Well, the money is being given to the Corps now, so they have no excuse not to move forward. And I would also add, as sort of an optimistic note of what's happened on the budget front, is that in this last budget cycle, Senator Feinstein, who sits on the Energy and Water Funding Subcommittee that does the budget for the Corps of Engineers, and others put in place mandates that the Corps of Engineers move quickly to do a limited number of new starts. And for those of you who remember the good old days before we didn't have earmarks, bans, and we had new starts, it's been a good 8 or 9 years before we've had language so clear to the Corps of Engineers that you must start doing new starts. So under the budget agreement, Congress directed that the Corps initiate a about 10 new projects across the country, one of which must be a public-private partnership concept. So you can see where things are going. The Corps' got money to do its current work, and it's being given an affirmative go for it from Congress to go forward and start some new work down the line. So the message I want to leave with you, and I don't want it to be too optimistic and sort of call it, what is it, the cliche, looking through rose-colored lenses, but we're seeing a fundamental shift in Congress right now. The members are starting to work again, trying to address the needs that are important to us. And while we're a long way from say, moving forward and actively doing a whole lot of projects, we're slowly seeing, I think, a thawing of sort of the gridlock, if you will, of getting projects authorized, getting projects funded. And I think in the coming few months before the campaign season tends to put things on hold come June or July until after November when they'll come back, I think you're going to see a lot of progress go forward on putting, shall we say, markers out there on what has to be done in the final hours of a congressional session. Last thought, Don, the last thought skipped over intentionally, drought. Will there be a drought bill? What I will tell you is that the drought issue is not just California's baby. We have a number of Western senators who, having watched the California drought debate unfold, are saying, hey, wait, we've got problems too. So we want to be in this game also, which is good news for California. Senator Murkowski, who is the chair of the Committee with Jurisdiction over Drought Matters, and Maria Cantwell, who's the ranking Democrat from Washington State. You've got Alaska and Washington State now looking at ways to deal with drought. And the Senator Cantwell and Senator Murkowski have both said we need to do a West-wide drought bill. So I think as you read about what's going on in Washington and you consider the, shall we say, the hurdles that have to be overcome in California to get a drought bill done, keep in mind that in many ways we're sort of a major piece of a play, but there are other acts that are involved in this play, and that's going to pull us along. And at the end of the day, for those of you who remember when the Central Valley Project Improvement Act was enacted into law back in the 90s, it was a big bill that was passed. It wasn't just California. So there are today the same sort of factors, presidential election cycle, congressional election cycle, everything in the balance, plus a desire at the end of a Congress to sort of wrap up unfinished business. So again, I think we're going to see something on drought in the next couple of months, and at the end of the day, if there is a drought bill, my bet is it's part of a bigger call it a public lands omnibus package that gets taken up by Congress and put to the President for signing into law. That, I think, is a quick snapshot of where we're at. I'd be happy to answer any questions, so I glossed over things too quickly. Don? Yes, Pierre.
Hey, Eric, this push for public-private partnerships, is that the precursor for doing away with municipal debt? Most everyone can finance their fairly cheaply new projects, except for the really small projects. Is this the first step in getting rid of community debt? Should we be worried about that?
I think, the easy answer to that, Pierre, is always be worried about your tax-exempt obligations being denied. At the same time, I think we're in pretty good shape to fight any efforts to deal with that problem. If that problem comes about as a real issue of loss, then it's a function that we're doing massive tax reform. You can't take away tax-exempt securities without dealing with the overall tax reform debate. It just won't happen. The other thing that I will say is that for those of you who know what WIFIA is, Water Infrastructure Financing, blah, 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 I can't even remember the whole acronym, but this was an innovative financing program that was part of WRDA to give EPA the authority to do low-interest loans. It's basically a more subtle way of doing state revolving loan fund programs by bringing in private sector monies. Congress made a change in the past year in the budget cycle that repealed, if you will, the prohibition of using tax-exempt securities in connection with WIFIA assistance. So in some ways, Pierre, you have a statement from Congress that, hey, we're on board. You need tax-exempt securities to do the WIFIA program. It would be somewhat hypocritical to then say, well, we're going to take it away for everything else. Yes, sir.
With the combining of public and private projects, will the government be issuing any kind of profit margin guidelines as they do in the defense industry?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Right now, the issue of profit on projects is not explicitly dealt with in any paper I've seen. What I have seen is more along the lines of, if you do a public-private partnership, is there the financial capability for this project to come to fruition and be delivered? Is the rate structure adequate to deliver this project? Things of that nature. But I haven't seen anything specific about profit margins. Having said that, you raise an interesting point. For those of you who say, well, what good is public-private partnerships, or why should we do them? The real question is, do you have somebody on staff that can negotiate for you in your own interest, that understands the private sector, so that you're not in a situation where your deal is structured in such a way that years later somebody says, oh my word, who in the name of God structured this deal? Our ratepayers are on the hook. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a little bit of response to that as well. ASCE did a infrastructure report card. We're well aware of that, well over $1 trillion. With only like $2 billion being allocated annually, or even $5 billion, still a drop in the bucket. And that's why there's some encouragement for P3 to bring additional surplus money to the table, because government's not going to fund all these projects, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, and you know, as I said at the beginning, public-private partnerships used to be one of those terms that people ran away from in the public sector, and it has turned now to the point where you have somebody like a President Obama saying this is a good idea. So you can see that there is this real, it may be glacial in some respect, but there is a real shift going on with respect to how we finance infrastructure in this country.
The PPPs funds must not be, because flowing, they have to be dedicated. And that's really the crux of the matter. And if someone else can put their hand in, the street's going to walk.
That's true. It's a whole different way of doing business.
As a final question, what's your water agencies doing right now to prepare themselves for the various programs you described? Should they be looking for shovel ready? Should they?
So the question is, what should you guys be doing for all this great money that's going to come down the pike? Two things. One is, if you've got a project that's in need of feasibility study work, start talking to the Bureau of Reclamation, for example, because the Bureau of Reclamation can initiate feasibility studies, and they will have the authority to do that. The second thing is, if you've got a project that's ready to go forward, and you're looking for dollars, and it's in the water efficiency sector, water recycling sector, given what the state is doing on water recycling that I read in the papers a couple of days, start talking to your regional water quality control board about how you can get some assistance from the SRF, highly subsidized, or get ahead of the priority list on the list because you have a water recycling or green infrastructure project, because the dollars are there. And as far as the future goes, just keep those cards and letters coming into Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer and Representative Calvert and all the members of the California delegation who are fighting the fight on water drought issues, and make clear to them that sure, you need environmental streamlining, sure, you need to have facilitated water transfer language to make the water system work maybe a little bit more efficiently, but don't forget about water infrastructure. That has been the biggest value that you folks have performed, is to keep pounding on the senators and the representatives about the importance of water infrastructure.
Very good. Well, thank you for the update.
Thank you for having me.
And we pay very close attention to when you're down here, because we know you're always dealing with the Orange County Water District, and we always ask, is Eric going to be down here, at a WACO time to...
You know, you'll have to talk to Director Green. She just won't let me out of my box.
Eric, thanks a whole lot. Well, that was a great update. Now we just have to work on the details of getting the money to start flowing to the water agencies. Okay, now we're at our program for the day, and that's certainly an interesting introduction to our presenter today. And we had the great fortune, some of us, of meeting with Julian last night to get to know him better and what he's been doing in his career and sort of a sense of what he's going to talk about. And it's extremely exciting. It's not something that we normally always talk about, like, what's the water supply condition, what's the snowpack, how much water are we going to get next year. But he's got Julian, a very interesting perspective that is, and especially when we hear about the public-private partnership, we talked a little bit about that also. But let me brief you on Julian Morris's background. Julian is Vice President of Research at the Reason Foundation, and it's a nonprofit think tank advancing free minds and free markets. And he's a graduate of the University of Edinburgh with a master's in economics, graduate studies at the University College London, Cambridge University, and the University of Westminster, resulting in further degrees at the master's level. And he's also had extensive training and equivalent degree in law. So he's qualified on so many different fronts. And he's an author of dozens of scholarly articles on issues ranging from on free trade and regulation of the Internet and many other types of academic activities. Also, he's a visiting professor at the Department of International Studies at the University of Buckingham, UK. And before the Reason Foundation, he was executive director of the International Policy Network, a London-based think tank, and co-authored and participated in review of other scholarly articles. He comes to us from New Jersey, so he's made a major effort, and we should thank him for taking such a large slice out of his time to make his presentation today. And I think we're going to learn a lot, and I know we're going to learn a lot. We learned a lot last night, and be sharing it with us. So Julian Morris, please join us, and thank you for coming to our meeting.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, all of you, for coming and listening to me this morning. It's a great honour and pleasure to be here. I have, of course, as Don said, come from New Jersey, where the problem is not too little water, but too much. On the hill in which we live, we regularly get flooded out, so that's a significant problem. Although it seems that you're not entirely it's not an entirely unusual phenomenon for you occasionally as well. I'm going to give you what I would call a sort of 30,000 foot view, and that's not just because I wrote this presentation from 30,000 foot, but because I want to try and get some sort of macro picture on what's been happening in California, both overall to the state and historically, and use that as a prelude to discussing some of the problems that exist and are likely to get worse, and some ideas about how those problems might be solved proactively, hopefully. So this is a familiar picture to you, the drought that's affected California over the course of the past 5 years became extreme, and the most recent picture from mid-December looks pretty nasty. You saw what the snowpack looked like last year. It's encouraging that the snowpack is looking much better this year, but still there's a long way to go to correct for the changes that have happened over the course of, and these pictures are, the picture on the right is a year old, but these contrast just two examples, Folsom Lake and Lake Oroville, the impact of the decline in water going into lakes and dam lakes. But of course, we have seen this. This is a picture from the 101 a couple of days ago, which, unpleasant in the extreme case, is a positive sign that there's more water coming as a result of the change in climate this year. However, longer term, things don't look so pretty. This graph shows the Palmer Drought Severity Index for California from 1895 to 2014, and you can see there's been a long-term trend towards more severe and longer droughts. Underpinning that is a rise in temperature. You can see on the blue is precipitation and the red is temperature. The precipitation, while highly variable, and that's important, has remained more or less constant. There's no significant trend. However, the temperature has gone up significantly on average over the course of the past 120 years. And that, of course, impacts on the snowpack, because when it's warmer, you in the winter you get less snow. So you're going to have to adapt to that. There's also been significant demographic changes. So here you can see the change in population of California and of Orange County. The one mirrors the other. Population rising from next to nothing in 1850, obviously, to now around 40 million in the state, and from near nothing in the late 19th century to over 3 million in Orange County. So what historically these changes in demographics and changing uses of water have led to responses, different kinds of response. So initially, here in California, people responded to the fact of drought, of aridity, by establishing on top of the wonderful English system of riparian rights, the system of prior appropriation. You're all very familiar with that. And then gradually developed some other adaptive responses. For example, the mutual water supply companies that developed in the mid to late 19th century, which enabled more local management of water, and then over time the development of these larger irrigation districts. In the 20th century, you saw much more involvement at the state and federal level. Changes in the definition of water rights, and then the creation of what was called the Water Commission, which became the State Water Control Board in 1914. The development of the State Water Project, and then federal involvement in terms of the Bureau of Reclamation, especially building various large infrastructure projects. I don't need to go through all of the details, but the bottom line is that you had a shift from local control based on relatively clearly defined property rights that enable sort of bottom-up solutions to top-down controls at the state and federal level that sought to aggressively increase supply through infrastructure projects. Then here we are right now. I suppose this is not very useful because it somehow in the transposition of the slide the category name has been supplanted. You can guess though where we are. So this the yellow is this is water use. the yellow is agriculture, and this is water use except for environmental purposes. Environmental purposes are about 50%, and this is the other 50% of water uses in California. And the yellow is agriculture. The grey is domestic. The light blue is commercial. The pink sliver is energy, and the other, I mean, don't even know what to describe. Sort of green is industrial. So you can see that the dominance still of agriculture in the state, which is noteworthy, not least because of the difference in value or potential value that can arise from using water for different purposes. So a study done in the mid-2000s suggests that the value per acre-foot of water put to production of alfalfa or cotton is about $60, which is more than farmers pay for it in the IID or PVID, because they're basically just paying for the supply at $15 to $20 per acre foot. But if that water were to be put to use in the production of semiconductors, an acre foot would be $1 million of value. So that's a pretty major difference in value. And in between there, you have domestic users who would be certainly willing to pay significantly more than $60 per acre foot in most cases. And those differences have led to some trades. The two are worth noting that you're very familiar with, one with the IID and one with the PVID. And both of them resulted in benefits to both parties, with the water districts, San Diego and NWD, paying significantly more than the agricultural users were currently paying. But it's noteworthy, as you know, that the IID deal necessitated the involvement of the Department of Interior, because there was significant pushback from farmers in the IID. Why? Because the IID is supplied with public water that isn't owned by the individual irrigators. By contrast, the PVID were quite happy to do a deal. There was a voluntary agreement. Farmers that have fallowed their land, or agreed in principle to fallow their land and then done so when the options have been exercised, have done so voluntarily. And have reaped the benefits from it. So that brings us to the issue of why there aren't more of these deals. One problem is the uncertainty of allocation, which in part results from the over-allocation of post-1914 rights. You are perhaps familiar with this study that was done in 2014, looking at the over-allocation of post-1914 water rights. I don't know if you can read all of them, but you can see. So the most important things here are the most significant columns are the third and the fourth, where and in fact let's just focus on the fourth column along, which tells you the percent runoff allocated. So that's comparing the amount that's been allocated with the amount of runoff. And so if you see, for example, the San Joaquin River, 861% of the annual average runoff has been allocated in water rights. Now, there are problems with this analysis in that the water that's allocated to farmers will be used and then it goes back into the system, or some of it goes back into the system. However, at 861% of the annual average runoff, it would require extremely light use by those to whom the water has been allocated to actually achieve a net positive flow at the end. Now, some rivers are not so heavily allocated at all, but the fact that there's been this over allocation poses a problem for the post-1914 rights system, creates especially challenges for junior rights holders, and causes those junior rights holders to be resistant to trading, because they don't want to lose they're not going to be able to trade. They will be simply subject to the consequences of senior rights holders selling rights, and so they resist them. There are also environmental impacts to changes in allocation. So if you move water from fields to a canal that takes it to a town, you will reduce the amount of water that's available downstream, or runoff water that is available to various types of wildlife. And of course, this has been a cause that has resulted in several major legal cases pertaining to the application of the Endangered Species Act, that has resulted in various restrictions on abstraction from the San Joaquin Sacramento river basin and elsewhere, that has significantly restricted the availability, hence the 50% of water that goes to environmental purposes. Perhaps most significantly, though, is the fact that these post-1914 rights are held largely by public agencies. Again, you can see, where have we gone to? You can see on the final column here the proportion of the rights in each river that are held by public agencies, whether they're state or federal, and in many cases it's close to 100%. The consequence of that is that the individual users of the water don't have a say in the subsequent sale of that water. They contract for its use, but they have a notional entitlement through that contract, but they don't have a longer term right to it. They don't have a property right. So resolving that would seem to be a high priority. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the priority of the current administration in Sacramento nor in Washington, D.C., and hasn't seemed to be a high priority generally among water users in California. So part of the purpose of my being here today is to encourage you to think about ways in which it might be possible to shift from the current system of state allocated contract rights to a more secure system of property rights for post-1914 rights holders, that would thereby free up or enable the transfer of water between those rights holders, would-be rights holders, and those who, like you, would benefit from being able to access that water. So the current solutions that are on the table, and I don't give all of them, but include, obviously, the water bond, which is still in large part to be allocated, although the categories of allocation have been determined, and those were determined by politics, not economics. It seems to me that many of the investments that are going to happen will be beneficial at some level, but they're also likely to be incredibly inefficient. They're not likely to be the best investments that could be made with that money. And there's I think, a significant risk of misallocation the funds. So you'll get less bang for your buck by pursuing the kinds of investments that have been designated for the water bond than would otherwise be the case. Yet again, California puts its taxpayers on the hook for billions of dollars and doesn't get a return. And at the end of the day, the $7.5 billion is very, very unlikely to solve the long-term problem. And even if you add in money from the federal government, it seems that we're a long way from solving the problem. It's not even worth talking about the usage restrictions, is it? I mean, they're simply ridiculous, imposing requirements, mandating requirements on water districts to reduce consumption of the good that they're trying to manage is just an unnecessary and often counterproductive top-down intervention. Shows a lack of trust of what are effectively I mean, it's obscene, actually. So then to some potential innovations in supply. I just want to quickly talk about a few of these. There are others that certainly could be on the table. As I mentioned, it would be quite feasible in principle to purchase additional water that's currently used in agriculture, but right now we have title issues for anything other than senior rights, and even when you have senior rights holders with title, there are often problems emanating from the impact on junior rights holders and the environment. There's actually some very interesting studies of water trading in California, but most of the trading that takes place is within districts. Like there's a study of Westlands, for example, which identified thousands of trades taking place, but nearly all of those trades, well, most of those trades, first of all, were actually within groups of farmers that were actually the same family, that they'd just broken things up into 980-acre parcels for tax reasons, but they had to trade amongst them in order to allocate the water efficiently. And then what remained were between those, essentially between families. Very, very, very little water was traded even outside of the district to other agricultural districts, let alone to others who would use the water, others who would have much higher value of the water, and that's all to do with these problems with the titling system. Expanding banking, the NWD has done, I think, some stellar work in developing water banking using the Kern Water Bank Authority and then in some other local banking. I'm a little bit confused about this, so I'd be interested in your assessment. But my understanding is that one of the constraints going forward would be the beneficial use requirement. I mean, that applies obviously primarily to the pre-1914 rights, but also to some extent to the post-1914 rights that have been allocated to farmers. So my understanding is that storage is not considered a beneficial use per se, but maybe we're simply in a limbo situation. If we are in limbo, then simply a clarification would be useful, because that would incentivize more banking. Could more dams be built? Of course, in principle, that might be a solution, but we've been going in the other direction. Dams have been taken down, environmentalists have been objecting, so that has high transaction costs to go down the dams route because of the objections that you would face from environmental groups. So it may not be worth pursuing. Desalination is an option that's being done, and also more are being considered. The question there is whether the costs merit the investment. And I don't think I can answer that, but certainly the costs seem to be high. Are there other resources that are currently untapped? the Cadiz is still pushing its project to bring water from the San Bernardino watershed to the San Diego area. Whether that would make sense or not, I don't know, but it's been blocked for now. Then there's the issue of building new conduits. If you're going to buy water from agricultural districts, then you're going to have to bring that water somehow, and the existing conduits may or may not be sufficient. They certainly could be managed better and priced better, and perhaps if there were fewer political constraints on arranging for water to be transmitted through the various conduits, then you wouldn't need to build new ones. But nonetheless, it's certainly worth considering, especially if new areas of water supply are being developed. So I've put question marks against all of these. Why? Because we can't know which are the best solutions, because we don't have a proper market in water right now in California. Prices are distorted or absent. You simply can't price something which can't be traded due to weak property rights. The problems associated with, especially the junior rights holders and the over allocation, and high transaction costs associated with dealing with permits and other and legal challenges that undermine these transactions. So, in a sense, we've got these options. We'd like to know which ones to pursue, but in order to do so, we need to make some changes to the structure of ownership of water in order to find out what the most efficient solution is. I'm going to quickly go through, and I'm going to be very brief about this, but because there's a paper on this on Reason Foundation's website, which you can read. One country that has gone through this problem relatively recently is Australia. The Murray-Darling River Basin in Australia, which is in the southeast, has a similar hydrogeological characteristic to California. It's temperate but with highly variable precipitation, and it's also sort of similar demographically. The cities are on the coast, and inland there's farming, and population growth has resulted in an increase in demand for water in coastal areas. And actually, Australia has a similar population to California. On top of that, Australia has similar environmental concerns to that of California, with especially concern over the impact of water diversion on species. So until the 1990s, the approach taken in Australia had been similar to the approach taken in California. Major infrastructure projects financed by central government, with water being supplied to agriculture at or below the costs of delivery, and certainly not taking into account the value of the water, as well as arbitrary and unpriced diversions for species conservation. In the 90s, reforms were taking place under which water rights were more clearly defined. This was equivalent to making the water rights, the post-1914 water rights, more clearly definable, tradable rights, the ones that are currently managed by public utilities in California. And on top of that, Australia has shifted from arbitrary diversions for environmental purposes to almost entirely purchasing rights voluntarily from water owners. California already does some of that. It already buys some water rights to protect the environment. But the majority of California's environmental protection for species that are subject to low flow water comes from these sort of legal decisions that result in arbitrary diversions. I'd also like to very quickly take you through some other common pool resources. So water is a resource that can't really, each individual molecule of water is very difficult to own. I mean, you can put it into a bottle and you can own it that way, but it's very difficult to own water if it's out there in the environment. So it's considered by economists to be what's known as a common pool resource. Now there are various ways in which common pool resources can be managed, and some that have proven to be very effective and enable more efficient utilization include the establishment of individual transferable quotas in fisheries. So in the 1970s, Iceland, which was a small country, population of 300,000, that was highly dependent on fishing, still highly dependent on fishing, faced a collapse of its fisheries through over extraction of fish from the surrounding waters. First of all, it addressed this problem by expanding the definition of its waters. In 1977, it went to war with Britain over its fisheries, and it won, which I think is a good thing because it enabled it to control a much greater territory of fish. It then established, instead of having arbitrary allocations of fish to boats, they created essentially a system of shares where each boat had a long-term interest, a long-term share, a right in a proportion of the fish that was to be caught in any individual year. So the government would define the total allowable catch, and then it would be chopped up into shares or allocated to the shareholders, essentially. And New Zealand followed this in the 1980s with doing exactly the same thing. And in both countries, what happened is the fishermen, having previously been highly resistant to having controls imposed upon them by government, and highly resistant to constraints on catches, in fact, pushing the other direction. They were saying, no, we don't want to be monitored, and we don't want to have any constraints on catches. We want to catch whatever we want. They completely reversed. It completely reversed the position, and the fishermen suddenly started calling for reductions in the total allowable catch. Why? Because if you reduce the total allowable catch this year, your stock of fish next year rises. So they could see that it's like being shareholders in a company where you reinvest in the company and the company grows. It's exactly what they did. And as a result, fisheries in both Iceland and New Zealand have become far more sustainable. They haven't suffered the collapse that was feared, nor the collapse that actually materialized on the Grand Banks of Canada and the United States, and is now happening in other European waters. So I think that's a demonstration of the benefits of creating individually transferable quotas. Another example would be oil unitization. So in oil fields in the West, the drillers faced the problem that they were each going down into, in any particular area, they're each going down into the same pool of oil. What did they do? They got together and they agreed amongst themselves allocations of the entire patch, and then unitized it, made it into a single unit that would then be controlled and abstracted in an efficient manner. So the first example, the ITQs, I think would be that could be adopted for post-1914 rights that are currently held by public utilities and allocated to farmers. And the second example, I think, might be one to follow with regard to the groundwater and groundwater banking. On top of that, there may be some legal definitions may need to be clarified. So, defining storage as a beneficial use, for example. Ending mandatory diversions for environmental purposes and switch to a funded program. And finally, simplifying the permitting process for water infrastructure projects. I think if these five things were undertaken, establishing an ITQ system for post-1914 water rights allocated to agricultural purposes, the unitization of underground reservoirs, the definition of storage as a beneficial use, ending mandatory diversions for environmental purposes, and simplifying permitting processes. I think if these were done, then it would be possible to have a market in water in California, and as a result of that, you'd then be able to identify which were the best ways of expanding supply and dealing with the long-term problem of highly variable water supply and increasing threat of drought. That's all I have to say, but I welcome your thoughts. Thank you.
Very good perspective on the subject matter. Any questions?
Pick me up on all my errors, by the way.
Your chart, a couple of things. You don't talk about groundwater recharge and storage. Very, very good storage mechanism.
Yep.
And your over allocation chart, if you had another column that you could squeeze in that shows the overdraw from the input side.
Yep.
And you could have a solution, and that goes to land subsidence. So you got a mess on your hands. The second thing is, I think the public of California gets the wrong impression on the allocation because they take 50% of water off the table.
Right.
And they say, oh, 80% to agriculture. That's baloney.
Yeah.
And if you take the numbers, the reduction that the governor said he needs here, the 25%, that's 2% of the water.
Right.
Take 2% away from environmental water and give it back to us. You know,
I would advocate taking it all away from environment. Why should the government reallocate it? Buy it if you want to protect the environment. Buy the water.
Of course.
No, I'm with you. Thank you. You're absolutely right on groundwater recharge.
Any thoughts? Here.
Hey, Julian, when you're over allocation of water, you're looking at the average flow in your column.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're saying it's over allocated. And it, on the surface, it really looks like it is, except that a lot of those rights are very junior rights, and they're only for the really wet years. And you have to file for the really wet years.
But my point wasn't that this is leading to dry rivers. My point was that those junior rights holders will object to the sale of the senior rights holders' water because they know that even in the wet years they're not going to get anything. I mean, so that is what happens, right? That's
10,000 acre feet of water, and I had senior rights, and it was in wet years there were 40,000. There's no impediment to me making a deal for the 10,000 because the guy knows each of them measured very carefully, and each of them knows what piece of the 40,000 acre feet belongs to them. And as long as they get that, whatever is left over, you're not taking their water. You're leaving their water in the deal. Because you measure what inflow typically into a reservoir is, and you have outflow being delivered. It's very carefully metered on it. So I don't think there's as much of a problem.
Maybe it's not so much of a problem all I see is that there's not many trades taking place. So maybe that's not a significant part of it, but there's certainly some barriers there.
To my knowledge, there has never been a federal water right ag to urban transfer or urban and state project transfer in the history of the two projects. So, because the feds follow the molecules, and they don't do swaps or exchanges.
So maybe what really needs to happen is that the federal water needs to be privatized. Or at least turned over to the state.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I note that you're talking about pooling for oil field
Actually, there are a number of groundwater basins in Southern California that's been done. And they're basically done by cooperation of the pumpers. And they develop some sort of a management tool to fully utilize it and make a sustainable resource. So steps have been taken.
So those are private rights holders that have done that, or is that? Are you talking about water districts, or are you talking about private agricultural rights holders?
It varies with basins.
Okay.
A lot of them, it's all urban areas and
Yeah.
a combination of public agencies and private water companies and mutual water companies.
And they put one entity in charge that controls the abstraction and.
They'll have a water master control that's locally generated in some fashion to maintain a sustainable production.
They're adjudicated basins.
Yeah.
They're
not adjudicated basins or
So and in those adjudication basins, they've created unitization.
So the current areas.
Julian, locally we've developed a system called the groundwater replenishment system where I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I didn't see it mentioned up there, and we currently produce 100 million gallons a day of clean water from the Orange County Sanitation District, and I think it's certainly not going to work in every scenario, but there are other applications and areas that it could work.
Sure. I mean, I understand that it's less costly to get water from the sanitation, effectively from grey water, and clean it and put it back in the system than to buy from outside. So that's another example of an alternative source, if you like, that will be available in relatively urbanized areas where you've got essentially a way of concentrating the outflow from domestic users.
Any additional thoughts, questions on the presentation? Well, again, thanks for joining us.
Sure, you're welcome.
Thanks, everybody.